Before pursuing a watch-a-thon of every full-length feature film directed by Orson Welles, he really was just that guy who made Citizen Kane and recorded the War of the Worlds radio broadcast. Through checking out his 13 completed movies, he has become much more distinct in the way he crafts a film. In addition to movies, I also checked out numerous interviews with him and learned what kind of guy he was. He had a vision and didn't fear the impossible. His trademarks included fast cuts and close-ups. He was constantly in contention with Hollywood producers, as they wouldn't finance his films or would seriously edit them to a point where it didn't match his vision. This led to a lot of dubbing and re-editing over the years. But one thing I learned about Orson Welles is that he never quit. He said in an interview that he would do side projects here and there and use the money he earned to make his next movie. If you weren't aware, there are a lot of Orson Welles movies that never saw the light of day. I'd recommend watching the documentary Orson Welles One-Man Band to get a glimpse as to what some of these movies were. Overall, I had a really fun time going through his movies. Now, although not all of them were personally my style, there were still elements to appreciate in even the worst ones. I visited new movies and had reunions with a few, but through it all, here are the 13 movies directed by Orson Welles ranked from my least favorite to my favorite. Number 13 goes to The Other Side of the Wind. There are many movies out there that you can't really identify a plot to. It just kind of happens before your eyes. And I think that this can either work really well or just not work at all. And in my case with Other Side of the Wind, it did not work. This was a movie project that was started in the 70s but wasn't released until 2018. It's really cool in the sense that it stars two film directors, John Huston and Peter Bogdanovich, but the problem is it just feels like a bunch of movie clips edited together just for the sake of making a movie. It doesn't feel like it's edited together for the sake of creating a story. And so for that reason, it was hard for me to feel invested and I just didn't have a very good time with it. Number 12 goes to The Trial. The biggest pros to this movie are Anthony Perkins, and I guess I also like the set design, but this whole entire movie feels like a nightmare, and not in a good way, in the way that I don't understand what's happening most of the time, and the way it was executed was just very poorly done. Since viewing it, I have heard that it's supposed to be presented in a way that is confusing. The source material that it is based on is also executed in a very strange, peculiar manner. The plot is exciting enough. I mean, a man being accused for a trial that he's unaware of. It really shows that the execution of a movie is very important, that it's not only about the plot. My number 11 is Macbeth, and my number 10 is Othello. I grouped these two together because they are both Shakespearean tales, and the things I like about both of them are the performances and the set design. I'm just not a big fan of Shakespearean tales, and Orson Welles was a huge fan of Shakespeare. The reason I put Macbeth below Othello is because I'm familiar with Macbeth. I had to read it in my undergraduate degree, and it's just not a story that really interests me, and so watching this movie was a little bit of a chore because I already don't really care for the story. And Othello beats Macbeth because I wasn't familiar with the story of Othello, and I really liked what happened on the screen. Mr. Arkadin is infamous for its 3 releases. You have Confidential Report, which was the first release, then you have the Corinth version, and then you have the Comprehensive Edition, which was created specifically by the Criterion Collection and released in their Criterion release. For this video, I watched the Comprehensive Edition. It's the longest of all 3 editions, and supposedly it's the closest to what Orson Welles originally envisioned. However, with that being said, Mr. Arkadin is a perfect example of just showing how hard it was for Orson Welles to create a movie that he wanted to create. Film studios highly interfered with his work, and it is very present and obvious in Mr. Arkadin. This movie has a ton of dubbing issues. It is very obvious. You know how sometimes you're watching a movie and they say a line and you're like, oh, that was dubbed, that's very clearly dubbed, but it's not that big of a deal. With Mr. Arkadin, basically every scene is dubbed, and it gets to a point where you're just kind of used to it after a while. It feels like Citizen Kane in the sense that a man is going around the country, going around the world really, to discover more information about this Mr. Arkadin character. It feels like F for Fake in the sense that there is a lot of deceit in this movie, and that's what makes it pretty exciting. However, even watching the Comprehensive Edition, the one closest to Orson Welles' vision, it didn't really stand out to me too much. I went into the Magnificent Ambersons with very high expectations, hearing from some that it's their favorite movie of all time, and unfortunately I was let down. And that's probably my own fault for having such high expectations. But the main character, Georgie, is very unlikable, and I know that movies can have unlikable characters, and that shouldn't be a fault to a movie, but in this case, it did make me dislike the movie a little bit more. I will say, however, that I very very much so appreciated the costume design, and I appreciated the time period that this movie takes place. It's right when automobiles are about to be created, and it's actually a pretty big focus in the movie. It felt cool being at this time period of history. I also love seeing snow in any movie, and so that was honestly another pro for me. The Immortal Story is one of Orson Welles' shortest movies, but it's one that I actually quite enjoyed. Orson Welles gives a very good performance as this aged man who really just doesn't accept stories to be stories. He wants stories to be real. There isn't much more to discuss other than saying that I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, it was just a good movie. The Lady from Shanghai was both uncomfortable, unsettling, and enjoyable at the same time. The more and more I think about the movie, the sillier it gets in my mind. Orson Welles is attempting to do, I believe it was a Scottish accent, and it sounds very amusing at times, but he also does a pretty good job at times too. There are also some camera zoom-ins on certain characters that I feel was just kind of unnecessary, and that's where the unsettling feelings came in, but it really did also set the tone for just how crazy some of these characters are. The final sequence that takes place in a fun house was very exciting, and I love what was done with the camera and how that scene was executed. The Stranger has Orson Welles and Edward G. Robinson, an actor that I really enjoy in every movie I see him in. This one is kind of like a cat and mouse game. It feels in a sense like Catch Me If You Can if you were to place that in World War II. The movie is exciting, entertaining, and actually pretty mature. In fact, I think this was the first movie to ever feature real-life Holocaust footage within the movie. And so for that, very mature subject matter, and I really enjoyed the movie overall. My number 4 goes to Chimes at Midnight. Orson Welles gives arguably his best performance as Falstaff, an overweight, drunk liar who, despite all his faults, you can't help but love. The difference between this Shakespearean telling and Macbeth and Othello is that I actually care about the character Falstaff. I'm actually invested in a story. I love hearing his outlandish tales and his dreams of living as royalty. Just a fair warning, there will be some spoilers for Chimes at Midnight, so if you don't want to hear spoilers, move on to my number 3 at this timestamp. The final scene between Prince Hal and Falstaff almost feels like a portrayal that resides on the same tier as the betrayal featured in The Social Network. Both scenes show a central character we've grown to love and care about get utterly betrayed and blindsided. You could almost take the music from The Social Network and place it as the audio for this scene. The fact that the movie continues with Falstaff dying of a broken heart makes this scene even harder. When a movie ends on a high note, it's hard not to remember only the good things. This final encounter between Falstaff and the prince is the best scene of the movie and the one I will remember if this ever comes up in a conversation. Chimes at Midnight also has a war scene that feels way too well done for a movie made in 1965. F for Fake is possibly the most immersive documentary I have ever experienced. It's not just boring interviews back and forth, but an in-depth look at forgery and deceit. We are introduced to 2 real-life forgers and even get a backstory on Orson Welles' forgery days. F for Fake's presentation feels incredibly formal at times, but the next moment feels far too casual, even including a clip of Orson Welles ordering a second dish at a restaurant in the middle of telling his story. Perhaps this hybrid formality and casualness is what made me feel so immersed. It's also a complete joy to see any scene with Orson Welles performing magic tricks. He was a very talented magician in real life, and we get a front row seat to his magic show. And in addition to all of this, hearing Orson Welles' voice for an hour and a half is so soothing. I could listen to him all day. I mean, who couldn't? And if you think that there are only cool magic tricks, just wait until you see the camera tricks. I really like the way this movie was crafted, edited, filmed, shot, all of the above. This is one of my favorite documentaries of all time. Number 2, Citizen Kane. The best movie ever, and one that has gotten better with every viewing experience. I saw the famous Citizen Kane for the first time in high school. Right away I thought, as I'm sure many of you did, this is considered the best movie of all time. A few years passed and I watched it again. The movie was no doubt better than before, but I still question how someone could claim Citizen Kane as the best movie ever made. 2018 comes around and my local theater is playing it. I'm a sucker for seeing classics on the big screen, so of course I had to give Citizen Kane a shot. And then this last summer, I actually watched it again in theaters for the 80th anniversary showing. And every time that I rewatch Citizen Kane, I realize more and more, yeah, this movie really is as good as everyone says it is. I don't consider it to be the best of all time, but I see why some do. Because at its core, Citizen Kane is so much more than a movie about fame and fortune. It could arguably be titled Reminiscence, as the core of the movie is dreaming of a life that once was. Kane is such a broken man, and the more and more I watch it, the more I feel for him and his life that was taken from him. It's honestly one of the saddest movies I've ever seen, yet many don't recognize it as emitting that emotion. I love Citizen Kane, and at this point, I always will. And my number 1 favorite Orson Welles movie is Touch of Evil. I didn't think that there could be an Orson Welles movie out there that could be better than Citizen Kane. However, it was rewatching this movie in preparation confirmation for this video that I was proven wrong. Going from a decent rating to a perfect rating should tell you how much more I love this on a rewatch. I hadn't seen it in over 7 years and I didn't think it fair to rank it due to the little I remembered from it. So I popped my Blu-ray into my PlayStation and I was absolutely floored by the time the 4-minute one-take sequence ended. Orson Welles wasn't necessarily known for long takes, but what he does in this movie reserves him a spot in the long take directors club. This is noir at its finest, it's storytelling at its finest, it's performances at their finest, it's crime drama at its finest. The list really could go on and on. Touch of Evil is just one of the greatest films I have ever seen, hands down. And it just goes to show that everyone should give a movie another chance. At least if you're feeling uncertain about it, if you have mixed feelings about it, you should give it that one more chance. The 3 leads are amazing, and I'm honestly still trying to accept that Charleton Heston was playing a Hispanic man, but he still did great. I love seeing Janet Leigh in anything, and the same goes for Orson Welles. The movie is filled with plenty of shadows, low camera angles, dialogue, suspense, fedoras, etc. I love the story, the deceit, and the ending. So what I'm trying to say is the whole movie is perfect. I'm going to spoil Touch of Evil, and so if you haven't seen the movie yet, watch that movie and skip to this part of the video for now so that you don't hear the spoilers. The final confrontation between the 3 characters on the bridge is very heartbreaking and very exciting at the same time. You have these 2 detectives that have been working together for years, and Charleton Heston coming in, who is suspicious of Orson Welles' character being a fraud, basically, in the work that he does. And finally, after 2 deaths, you find out that Orson Welles was correct. This young Hispanic man did plant the dynamite in the car. However, it was his method of solving it that was incorrect. And that reveal really stuck with me. He was right, but he just wasn't right in the way he was right. I am a big fan of the way this movie ends. I love everything about it. It feels very mature for a movie made in the 50s. In fact, it holds a PG-13 rating to this day because of the subject matter. And for a movie beating Citizen Kane, the best movie of all time, it really is very good. Now, I need you guys to do me a favor. I want to hear what your favorite Orson Welles movie is. Whether you've seen 1 or 13 movies, let me know down below in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you have a great day.